You know what separates me from practically every other person who's reviewing the Halo TV show episode by episode? And no, it's not the fact that I get like 8 views and they get a billion. It's that I'm tired of the other reviewers making excuses for what the show could be, and I've instead tried to focus on what the show currently is. There's a lot of really good thematic themes going on in the show, and while it is still far from perfect, I think it has really found its stride, as most series do around the second season. It begins to kind of cut away the fat and focus on things that people really want to see. And what we want to see is the fall of Reach. And this episode is so jam-packed with tension and dread that at any moment you feel like the Covenant are going to spring out and attack. And they finally do at the end, which is great. I think we're going to finally start lining up for future engagements, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the video, as well as some potential theories. We'll have to wait and see how that works out. But as a whole, I thought episode 3 of season 2, called Emergence, really kind of found its stride. Ackerson continues to be the kind of anti-hero villain of the show. He's the face of the evil government Oni. He's the face of everything that's wrong with humanity not trying to stand up for itself. And he mentions specifically the winter contingency, which I smiled because I knew what it was. Additionally, it was actually one of the campaigns in Halo Infinite, which was kind of cool. But the winter contingency was basically established by Oni in the event that the Covenant are beginning to take over a planet. It was how they would evacuate successfully, but knowing full well that not everybody would survive. And even Ackerson knowing and Oni knowing and the top brass knowing that the Covenant are on Reach preparing to attack, and them seemingly only evacuating the VIPs really seems to indicate just how evil this kind of government organization has become. Instead of trying to rescue everybody that they can, they're going to leave a lot of the civilians as bait so that the higher officials, the more important military equipment, trade secrets and everything can be evacuated. And that is really kind of messed up if you think about it. So Ackerson mentions to Admiral Hood that he is fully aware of what's going on. They knew that the Spartans that went out to the relay station, which another nice little Easter egg ties back to the same name of the relay station inside the game, Halo Reach. So it's nice to see a little bit of kind of throwback to the lore there. Basically, they knew that Cobalt Team was dead. And the fact that John was carrying on and being very frustrated and basically saying that he knew that something was going on was all an act. Ackerson was well aware of everything. He knows, he's seemingly all mind. He knows what's going on. And he was aware that the invasion had begun silently. And there's a really great scene between Ackerson and Halsey. And then there's another really great scene with Ackerson and his father. We come to find out that his father has Alzheimer's. His father is kind of fading in of out of clearness. He's getting old. He's got some form of either Alzheimer's or dementia. But he remembered distinctly that Ackerson told him, in the event of an invasion, don't let them take me alive. And Ackerson commits patricide, which is insane. It is so insane. It just shows how far this guy is willing to kind of like cover his tracks. We also find out that Ackerson's sister was actually a kind of failed Spartan too, the same sister who was spending all this time with Halsey. That creates somewhat of a plot point in the sense that Halsey should have immediately known Ackerson was behind everything, because why else would they use the image of Ackerson's dead sister to kind of torment Halsey in the cyber jail? But I digress. But Ackerson's character here is so well defined throughout this entire episode. Every scene that he is in, he really steals the show. They've done a phenomenal job of building him up. He does seem to care. He is defensive that reaches his home, but he also knows that it's lost. Before the battle's even begun, before the first shots are even fired, he knows the battle is lost. He's been using Cortana to run these simulations, and he's found that they can't win no matter what. Hood isn't willing to accept this, and Hood is clearly going to rally the troops. We've seen a lot of that in the promotional material coming up, but it just kind of aligns with Hood's character. Although he's not really the most well-developed character on the show, it's very clear he does have a sense of pride and honor, and he did go out of his way to try to protect John during his not one but two AWOL engagements in this episode. But I'm glad to see that Hood is finally kind of standing up to Ackerson, and he's going to go basically defend his home the only way he knows how, most likely dying on the sword. Other parts of the episode that I thought really worked is kind of the scattering of the team right before the invasion. The show definitely finds its stride, I think, in those really finely choreographed cinematic scenes where you have all the Spartans come in. And it's been very clear to me as just a fan, but I think anybody who's just watching the show somewhat casually, that Spartans are definitely a formidable force. When they're in their Mjolnir power armor, when they're armed to the teeth, they're able to go toe-to-toe. We saw that in the very first episode of the season, back in season 1, the premiere. We've also seen other engagements with the Covenant throughout the show where the Spartans can hold their own. So giving them their power armor and giving them all access to all weapons very early on in the engagement from a thematic like television show sense doesn't make a lot of sense, because it would just be basically like 3 hours of John Wick. Now, I would love that, by the way, but I understand that the budget of the show doesn't really willingly allow them to do that. So they're going to have to probably play a little more like guerrilla tactics. And that's exactly what they set up with all of the characters leading into the big explosion at the end, which I believe is going to be the kind of the opening salvo in the engagement on Reach City. You have Riz, who is going to visit her friend Lewis. Lewis, again, is the failed Spartan 2 who went blind. He's there living with his either boyfriend or husband, I'm not quite sure, but his romantic partner. And Riz goes over there because she says she has nowhere to go. Clearly, Lewis is a kind of friend to Riz, but he's also like sort of her psychologist in a sense, kind of helping her unpack some of the things she's feeling and experiencing as a result of the Spartan 2 program. There was a lot of promotional scenes of Riz leading what I think is going to be the Spartan 3 army. I think this whole kind of crisis of conscience that Riz is having, I think is going to help her emerge as more of a leader. And she has actually been probably the most active Spartan out of the group outside of John, at least in terms of character development. We didn't really see much of her in season 1 at all. So it's nice to see that she's getting some spotlight and we're beginning to kind of understand a little bit more about what makes her tick. Vanek and Kai, they're actually in the barracks. So I think they're probably going to get their moment to shine because they're going to be suited up as the engagement begins. They're going to be in one of the armories, full armor, full weapons. I think they're going to do some serious work against the Covenant. And I think that's good because while Kai kind of had her moment in season 1 with, putting the grease in her hair and pulling out the emotion chip, I think that Vanek hasn't really got his time to shine. And I'm curious to kind of see a little bit more of him. I'm concerned that he's going to be fodder and he's going to drop quickly. I think the actor is awesome. I love his voice, particularly when he has a helmet on. He has a very gruff voice, and he just has a very menacing look to him. He's like one of the power Spartans, and I'm curious to see if the show is going to kind of redeem his character a little bit and give him more to do. But I think those two are going to be primarily a large part of the focus during the next episode because they're going to be basically, open armament to just go to town on the Covenant. I'm really excited to see how that plays out. The chief went off to meet with Corporal Mendez. He's in the church. He does not have any weapons. He does not have his armor. He's still trying to fight. And something that they talked about a lot on the first episode of the behind the scenes, behind the making of YouTube specials that they do for each of the episodes. The actor, Pablo Schreier, talked a lot about how the more that Chief is pushed away from his friends, the more he finds inner resolve. And in this episode, boy, did he look crazy to the outside. But this is another one of those unfortunate TV tropes where if he just sat down and explained himself clearly in a minute, everybody would understand. but it's one of those things where like they don't explain anything and it's just a misunderstanding after a misunderstanding after a misunderstanding. And it is a little frustrating that no one's listening to the chief, even though everything he's saying we know to be true, and it is lining up factually. And now we know that Oni's pulling the strings behind the scenes. However, I think now that the Covenant are attacking, a lot of the Chiefs' previous nonsense, going AWOL twice, being banned, the team being dismantled, I think that's all going to be thrown away because it's just going to basically be straight into war. They're not going to take one of their most prized assets as a loaded Spartan 2 and say, well, until you get a psychiatric evaluation, you can't fight for, Reach's freedom. I don't see that happening. So I think that was, we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm curious about that plot thread specifically because Chief is very, very against authority this entire season. And I'm curious to see how that gets resolved. If he has his moment of redemption with Hood, maybe that's enough for him. Maybe him and Hood are standing shoulder to shoulder in a hallway, eventually shooting waves of Covenant, and they kind of give each other a look like, hey, you were right, and hey, I know. I'm not really sure. We'll have to wait and see. Soren and Halsey, interesting, are now together in cyber jail. So the whole thing with Soren and the rubble seems to be kind of wrapping up. I'll talk about Kwan in a moment, but suffice to say that Soren was kidnapped by Oni and brought to be in a holding pen with Halsey. I'm not sure to what extent Ackerson believed getting those two together would do anything. It's very clear Soren was obviously he escaped. He's basically AWOL as well, but he passed the Spartan 2 test, and during one of the missions, he runs away and he lives his own life in the rubble with his wife and his child. It'll be interesting to see what he does when he's confronted with Halsey. I think there's a part of him that just wants to strangle her and kill her for what she had done to him. But knowing that they're locked together and they haven't really had any on-screen time, I'm curious to see how that relationship will work. If they're in this bubble entirely and they have no idea that Reach is actually actively being attacked, there might be some really heartfelt conversations that might act as kind of the refresher or the breather in between some of the heavier action scenes. It'll be curious to see how those two interact. I suspect ultimately they're going to be the ones responsible for getting Cortana out of the base and evacuating with Cortana, which will lead us to Installation 04, but I don't know for sure yet. And we talked a little bit about Hood basically telling Ackerson to stick it and going off to suit up in battle. We haven't seen Miranda at all in this entire season. Miranda was really hot on the hunt in the last season about the artifact and Oni's involvement, and that whole plotline seems to have been destroyed, which I do find frustrating. Unfortunately, Kwan's plotline has somehow reemerged, and she has turned into some sort of ninja. My wife and I jokingly call it Kwan Fu, when she can actively kill everybody, basically, seemingly without much effort. Insane close combat skills. She can, I don't know where she got this training from. 6 months ago, she was a little kid crying because she was handcuffed to a motorcycle in the middle of a desert. Now she's killing people, armed pirates, taking over ships, blowing dudes out of airlocks, murdering people in cold blood, blood splatting all over her face. She has somehow leveled up, which I don't understand. I think Kwan's whole role as a character now is to get the ship to Reach, to get the family back together. She seems to have some sort of involvement with the artifact or the portal or the precursors. I'm not really entirely sure. Or the Forerunners. We don't know. She seems to have some connection to, the mythological side of Halo. I hope her story does come to an end soon. I have continuously said I think she is a distraction from the show, but at least if she is going to Reach, where I think the rest of the season is going to take place on different engagements in or around Reach, I'm hopeful at least that she will, at least be involved with some of the characters again. And maybe we won't see the Rubble again for the while, or maybe not at all. I thought it was a cool idea. It definitely took a lot of vibes from kind of those rogue space cities. But during the invasion of Reach, I can't imagine they're going to cut back to the Rubble at all. There's no characters left there other than maybe Soren's child, but it sounds like he is escaped or he's going to go somewhere else. So it's unfortunate, the set designers build this amazing city like they did with Madrigal, this amazing set design like they did with the Rubble, and the story just doesn't really kind of feed into those places very well. And it felt so disconnected that I think it's time to cut ties. In a lot of the ways in season 1 or episode 1 and episode 2, how I thought they did a lot of cleanup of the previous season, I think this is kind of like the final straws of that. I think now you have a core group of characters minus Miranda, or maybe she's been written out. I don't know. You have a core group of characters that you're invested in. They're all in the same place. They're all doing the same thing. Their stories are now intricately tied together, or about to be intricately tied together, because they're all going to be on the same planet together. And my hope is that all of the kind of nonsense that we saw before with jumping around between different set pieces that didn't quite make a whole lot of sense, my hope is that those kind of start to take a back seat. Overall, I thought this was one of the strongest episodes of this season, definitely one of the strongest episodes of this series. I think, as I said, Ackerson has really taken a strong role, and they've done such a phenomenal job of building up tension between all the characters, tension between this big, scary covenant, and finally the beginning of the invasion of Reach. I can't wait to see next week's episode. I think that's when it's really going to hit the fan. I don't see any more buildup happening. We already know all the players are in place. The action's ready. We've got intent and purpose, and now we just need to go loud and watch the UNSC fight as hard as they can, but unfortunately, we know how that ends. So I'll be back again next week with another review of episode 4 this time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.